When Marco settled beside the dead landline again tonight, the room tilted. My vision tunneled, my breath stalled. In that split second I knew he wasn't waiting for a phone call. He was waiting for him. Tom has been gone a year. I'm 58, widowed, marooned in the quiet house we once called too small for all our plans. The avocado green rotary phone, a thrift store trophy Tom adored, hasn't had a dial tone in over a decade, yet I never threw it out. It sits on the hallway table like a fossil of our marriage, chipped, stubborn, impossible to ignore. Marco, the broad-shouldered orange tabby Tom, and I rescued off Maple Street 10 years back, has made that phone his evening pilgrimage. At first it was charming, an old cat choosing a quirky perch. But charm curdled into ritual. Every night, somewhere between 9:30 and 9:40, he pads down the hallway, leaps onto the side table, curls his tail around the phone's base, and stares at the receiver as though it might sprout wings. Tonight, when he did it again, light seemed to drain from the bulbs. My knees weakened. A thought I'd been dodging for months slammed straight into my chest. Marco isn't fascinated by plastic. He's keeping vigil. I tell myself stories while the kettle warms, keeps the loneliness from echoing. Most are about Tom. How we met at a community jazz dance and stepped on the same stranger's foot at the same time. How, 5 years later, a half-starved kitten followed us home from the corner store and marched straight through our open door like he'd paid the mortgage. Tom laughed so hard he nearly dropped his grocery bag. "Guess we've been chosen," he said, scratching the kitten's dirt-caked chin. We named him Marco Polo, explorer, survivor, heart thief. Back then the rotary still worked. Tom loved its heavy tick-tick-tick, a sound he claimed made every call feel important. When cell phones took over, he retired it but refused to junk it. "Some things remind us who we are," he'd say, wiping dust from the handset the way one might polish a metal. And now, each twilight, Marco curls beside that silent relic exactly like he did by Tom's feet during football games. The first week after Tom's funeral, Marco wandered the house like a detective, nose pressed to Tom's work boots, whiskers brushing the old bomber jacket he'd never let me throw out, tail flicking beneath Tom's empty armchair as if waiting for the recline lever to snap back to life. I watched him search and thought, "Me too, buddy. Me too." But the searching ended. The waiting began. One Tuesday in January, snow whispering at the windows, I found Marco sitting at the phone, back straight, ears tilted forward in regal concentration. I chuckled, snapped a picture for my sister, captioned it "Operator on duty." The night after, he did it again. And again the next. By the second week, amusement thinned into unease. The hour never changed. Neither did the posture. It was as though a bell only he could hear rang at 9:30 sharp, commanding attendance. I tried to break the spell. Placed his treat dish in the kitchen at 9:29. He trotted over, crunched every last kibble, then trotted right back, punctual as a station master. I moved the phone to the top shelf of the bookcase. Marco paced, meowed once, and after 2 restless circles, reared onto his hind legs, claws scrabbling up the wood until the shelf trembled. I surrendered, set the phone on the table again, heart thumping harder than it should have. Waiting for a call from the great beyond, are we? I joked, voice brittle. Marco's tail flicked. His green eyes never left the receiver. One night I whispered, half teasing, half pleading, "Are you waiting for Dad?" My own words chilled me. Marco turned, slow as moonrise, and leveled a stare so steady it rooted me to the floor. Marco looked at me not like an animal, not even like a friend, but like someone who remembered far more than he should ever know. I barely slept after that. Tonight, kettle silent, lights low, I study him from the hallway doorway. The second hand on the wall clock ticks toward 9:40. Marco's ears pivot, battering my nerves. He leans closer to the phone, whiskers brushing the dented receiver cradle. My mouth goes dry. He's listening, I think, absurd yet undeniable. For what? For whom? A gust rattles the window panes. Somewhere outside a truck backfires, and I flinch, the sound echoing down hollow corridors of memory. Marco doesn't move. He might as well be carved from copper. My rational brain claws for footing. Cats are creatures of habit. The table is warm from the hallway vent. The plastic holds heat. That's all. Yet the theory shatters against the harder, stranger evidence of his timing, his insistence, the way he watches that phone, the way I watched Tom's hospital monitor, waiting for numbers to spike, for life to return. I miss him too, I murmur into the hush. Marco's ear twitches. But he's gone, love. The last word fractures. The hallway smells faintly of Tom's aftershave. A bottle too old to spray still leaks ghost notes of cedar and citrus. Maybe Marco smells it too. Or maybe, and here my chest tightens, he smells something else. Someone else. An urge rises to scoop him up, to carry him far from this haunted prop, to pretend grief obeys relocation. But I don't move. Some fragile wire in me recognizes that his vigil is bigger than comfort, bigger than sense. Interrupting feels wrong, like walking between a soldier and his fallen comrade. The clock clicks 9:41. Marco blinks once, a slow shudder. Nothing happens. No ring splits the air, no static whispers from severed wires. My shoulders sag. For a heartbeat I think perhaps this was the night it would finally end, and relief pricks behind my eyes. Then Marco lifts his head, pupils dilating, and leans so close his nose nearly touches the receiver. I gasp. My heart stumbles. And in that blind bright instant a thought slams so hard it steals the breath from my lungs. What if Tom never stopped calling, only I'm not the one meant to answer? I stagger back, clutching the doorframe, tears hot and sudden. Marco doesn't flinch. He keeps his post. That's when I understand. This isn't a habit. It's a message still writing itself in the dark, one I'm too afraid to read, yet too desperate to ignore. I want to believe the story ends there, that I whispered goodnight, flicked off the light, and grief fell quiet. But if I'd known what the silent phone would do tomorrow, what my cat would show me, I might have prayed for ignorance. I did not pray. I only watched, shivering in the half-dark, while Marco stared at the phone as though somewhere, far beyond the hush of this empty house, a line was ringing, and ringing, and ringing. The house was ink black, but for the small digital clock on Tom's side of the bed, 2 a.m. straight up. I'd been tossing under the quilt, mind full of half-dreams and the hush of winter air pressing against the window panes. Somewhere downstairs the boiler kicked, then fell silent. A beat later the whole world felt as still as the inside of a seashell. One shrill note cut through the dark like a blade. My heart seized so hard I thought it might crack a rib. The old phone? Impossible. A month ago I'd traced the cord to the wall and found nothing but dead copper. Tom had disconnected the service when smartphones took over. I stared into the dark, waiting for the ring to echo again, praying I'd imagine it. No imagining. My pulse roared in my ears. I flung the quilt aside, bare feet slapping the cold floor, and raced down the hallway with the panicked grace of someone fleeing fire. Marco was already there. He sat upright on the side table, tail curled to a perfect question mark, eyes preternaturally bright, as if he'd known the exact second the sound would split the night. The phone's cracked plastic face glinted under the hallway lamp I'd left burning low. I felt the floor tilt. The noise was too loud for a line that shouldn't exist, too hollow, too real. My hand hovered above the receiver. "Who?" My own voice came out in a hoarse whisper I didn't recognize. The ring chopped off mid-pulse, the silence after it so sudden it punched the air from my lungs. Marco did not move. I drew the receiver to my ear. Nothing. Not even the faint hum landlines used to give when the call was live. I opened my mouth to speak anyway, because terror will make a person bargain with silence. "Hello," I croaked. The words sounded brittle, like glass underfoot. A pause long enough for my heartbeat to count out 5 frantic thuds. Then soft static bled into the line, faint and crackling, the way old AM stations crumble at the edges when the signal drifts. It reminded me of road trips with Tom, the dial hunting for baseball commentary lost between counties. Only this wasn't nostalgia, it was a thread pulled taut through the ether, vibrating against my ear. Tom. The name slipped out before I could stop it, raw and terrified. The static wavered, rose, fell like a breath catching. Marco began to purr. Low, rolling, deep-throated, the kind of contented rumble he reserved for winter afternoons curled in Tom's lap. The sound vibrated through the wooden table, into my palm, up my arm. The hair on the back of my neck lifted as though the very particles in the hallway were listening. "Who is this?" I tried again, louder. My voice shook so violently the words fractured. "Speak to me." Static answered, fizzing like rain on vinyl. Then, just as suddenly, it snapped to silence. A dead, hollow silence that pressed against my eardrum with physical weight. I kept the receiver to my ear even after the line went flat, desperate for a hiss, a breath, a syllable, anything that might stitch this bizarre moment into logic. Instead, the phone emitted one last, tiny pop like a soap bubble bursting close to the skin, and the connection severed. My knees gave out. I slid to the floorboards, receiver still clamped to my ear, fingers white around the corded handle. Shivers rattled my spine in sharp, involuntary jolts. Marco hopped lightly from the table and settled beside me, still purring, as if to say you heard it too. "See?" I pulled the receiver away, stared at the inert cradle, then pressed it to my chest the way a mother might hold a fevered child. "It's not possible," I whispered, though the words tasted like a lie even inside my own mouth. A landline without service does not ring at 2 in the morning. Dead circuits do not conjure static. And house cats, no matter how cherished, do not schedule vigils with ghosts. Yet the evidence sat undeniable. The hollow throb still in my ears where the ring had been, the quaking exhaustion in my limbs, the warmth of Marco's side against my thigh, vibrating steady reassurance into the marrow of my bones. "I can't breathe," I gasped, pressing a trembling hand to my sternum. This wasn't a glitch. Glitches belong to machines and software. This felt older, stranger, like a rope tossed across a chasm, tugged from somewhere I couldn't see. Marco leaned his forehead into my calf, eyes half closing, purr deepening. The gesture anchored me to the floor, forced the panic to slow, one heartbeat at a time. I let the receiver slide from my grip. The handset thudded soft against the rug, lifeless now, a spent shell. A wild thought flickered. Maybe it's over. One impossible ring, nothing more. But a colder question knotted itself behind my ribs. What if it's only the beginning? I should have disconnected the phone then, sealed it in a box, driven it to the dump at dawn. Instead, I sat there until the hallway light sputtered out, stroking Marco, listening for a sound I both dreaded and craved. Because somewhere beneath the fear, a truth pulsed. This was no accident. This was contact. And if the line could open once, it could open again. Warning crept in like a trespasser, muted, guilty, unwelcome. I'd slept no more than an hour. Heart snagged on the memory of that impossible ring. By 8:30 I was pacing the kitchen, palms raw from squeezing the coffee mug too tight, eyes flicking toward the silent hallway phone as if it might pounce. Marco trailed me, tail brushing my ankles. Every so often he paused, head canted toward the front door, ears twitching at something I couldn't hear. When the mail truck finally clattered away, he sat bolt upright. An order, unmistakable. Go. I obeyed. Outside, winter sunlight glazed the porch rail, turning frost into glitter. The mailbox felt colder than the air. Inside lay a single cream-colored envelope, thick, edges bruised, no return address, my name scrawled in a hand I traced with my thumb and almost recognized. My breath clouded white as I turned it over, no postmark either, just the faintest damp smudge where an old stamp had absorbed morning dew. I carried it inside like it might detonate. At the dining table I broke the seal. The paper inside was onion-skin thin, yellowed, smelling faintly of engine oil and sun-baked sand, scents that yanked me straight to Tom's stories of desert checkpoints and makeshift barracks. The date in the top right corner read July 14th, 1993. My stomach nodded. 1993 was the year Tom shipped out on a UN peacekeeping rotation he rarely discussed. Dearest Mrs. Richards, the first line began, ink faded but legible. My pulse stumbled. No one called me Mrs. Richards anymore. I pray this reaches you someday, though I hope the reason it's sent never comes to pass. My name is Captain Raymond Ray Collins. Your husband saved my life outside Al Ramadi when a market convoy exploded. Shrapnel caught my leg. He dragged me clear while rounds still cracked over our heads. That night, knowing tomorrow wasn't promised, we made a pact. If one of us didn't make it home, or if one of us couldn't send word, we'd deliver an last memory to the other's family. Something tangible to prove courage and friendship outlast war. We sealed our letters, swapped them, and promised not to open unless the unthinkable happened. Tom never told me much about his life stateside, except he had a wife who loved jazz and a ginger cat who thought he owned the house. Marco, he said, like the explorer. Smartest creature I've met in any desert. I left service in '95. We lost touch, but I kept Tom's envelope safe in my footlocker, waiting for a sign. Last month a buddy forwarded an obituary, Thomas E. Richards, 59, beloved husband. It didn't say how, just that the world is purr now. I'm honoring our oath the only way I know, by sending his handwriting back to you. Inside this outer letter is the sealed note he wrote that night, covered with sand and sweat and hope. I haven't read it. It's yours. And please tell Marco I'm still with you both. He'll understand. With deepest respect. Ray Collins. My vision wavered. Another, smaller envelope slid from the fold. Tom's looping script across the front. If life steals my voice, let this speak. The seal was intact, the paper brittle as dried petals. Hands shaking, I traced the familiar capital T, the lopsided R he always cursed. The urge to crack it open right there nearly swallowed me. But some instinct, maybe fear of breaking the last thing he'd ever touched, held me still. That's when Marco leapt onto the chair beside me. He stepped onto my lap with solemn purpose, circled once, and settled, pressing his warmth into my thigh. His purr rose, steady as a lullaby I didn't know I needed. The dining room spun out of focus until only the envelope and the rumble beneath my fingertips felt real. I leaned back, letter clutched to my chest. How did it travel 32 years and land here the morning after the phone rang? Coincidence stretched too thin, snapped. The pact, the call, the cat at vigil, threads braiding into something I could hardly breathe around. I closed my eyes. Memories flooded, Tom's laugh echoing across the living room hardwood, the way he'd tuck Marco's paw under the rotary handset and pretend the cat was taking messages. The night he limped through the door after a stateside PT mishap and whispered, "Ray owes me a beer, but I owe him my secret chili recipe." I'd giggled, clueless of what that debt truly meant. Now Ray had paid his. Tears punched free at last, hot and relentless. Grief I'd damned for a year burst its banks. I clutched the unopened note as if it were Tom's pulse itself. Marco lifted his head, green eyes wide, and nudged my chin with the top of his. I folded over him, shoulders heaving, letting sound tear loose, a raw, keening cry that scraped the knot in my throat clean. I held the letter and Marco crawled fully into my lap, exactly as he used to when I sat beside him. And, for the first time in a year, I sobbed until I couldn't see. When the storm inside me finally softened to hiccups, I swore I felt another weight in the room, lighter than air, warmer than sun through glass. Maybe hope, maybe a presence. Perhaps only the hush, after a heart breaks open. But as Marco purred and the sealed envelope rested against my palm, one truth settled like ash on snow. Tom wasn't finished speaking. And I, shaken, dripping, impossibly alive, wasn't done listening. That afternoon the house felt charged, like the moment before a thunderclap when the air grows metallic on your tongue. I set Ray Collins's envelope on the coffee table, placed Tom's unopened note on top, and paced circles so tight Marco tracked me with wary eyes. Grief had always been a fog, thick, shapeless, relentless. Now it was a jigsaw spilling across my memory, pieces flipping upright one after another, pictures sharpening whether I liked it or not. The first piece was the photo, our favorite, propped for years on the mantel. Tom in a Cubs cap, grinning so wide you could count every laugh line, Marco draped across his shoulders like a feather boa that refused to lie flat. After the funeral I caught Marco sitting before that frame night after night, touching the glass with one paw, claws sheathed, as gentle as a prayer. I'd scooped him up, pressed my cheek to his fur, and whispered, "He's not inside there, silly." Marco had wriggled free, hopped back, and resumed his silent vigil until sunrise. I'd chalked it up to a cat's stubborn curiosity. Today, holding Tom's still-sealed words, I understood. Marco hadn't been curious. He'd been communing. That glass stood like a thin veil between now and then, and my cat, more faithful than a headstone, kept the channel open. A shiver rippled from scalp to soles. Piece 2 slid into place with a click that left me queasy, the bathroom scratching. During Tom's last hospital stay, Marco developed an odd obsession with the upstairs bath, scrabbling at the closed door, urgent, frantic, as if something precious was locked inside. I'd swing it open, demonstrate the empty tiles, the ghost white towels, the steam-splotched mirror. He'd prowl the rug, meow once, then retreat, bewildered. I remember snapping, "There's nothing in here, Marco," voice thin with exhaustion. He'd sat in the doorway staring up at me like a doctor waiting for a patient to acknowledge the diagnosis. Only now, heart banging, I remembered what lived in the linen cabinet. Tom's shaving kit, untouched since the morning he collapsed. His scent, locked in bristles and aftershave bottle, and the little tin of mustache wax he used for special occasions. Marco wasn't looking for a ghost. He was locating the last living fragment of Tom's skin and breath, marshalling it close so the tether wouldn't fray. He'd tried to show me. I'd slammed the door on the message. Third piece, the scream. The day Tom died I woke before dawn to Marco's howl, raw, broken, more human than feline. He stood on the kitchen counter, tail puffed, eyes huge, wailing straight at the ceiling. I'd nearly dropped my coffee. 30 minutes later the hospital rang. Cardiac arrest during a routine physiotherapy walk. They did everything they could, the nurse said, voice syrup thick with pity. At the time I labeled Marco's outburst bad dreams or a sudden bellyache. Now the truth slammed so hard I braced on the banister. Marco felt Tom's heartbeat stop half a city away. Distance meant nothing to whatever golden thread strung between them. I sank onto the sofa, lungs pumping too fast. Marco leapt up, settled on my knees, and fixed those sage-green eyes on me, patient, expectant. "Marco," I whispered, stroking his ears, "you weren't waiting. You were holding the line for him, weren't you?" My voice cracked. His purr started, soft as an old turntable needle finding its groove. I forgot, I rasped, vision blurring. I let the line drop. But you never did. I pressed both palms to the sealed note, heat of paper seeping into skin. Images tumbled in, Tom winding telephone cord around his finger while telling deployment jokes, Tom napping on the recliner, Marco curled on his chest, their breath synced, Tom teasing, "If anything ever drags me off this planet, I'll call reverse charges." I'd laugh then. Who keeps a landline for sentimental pranks? Me. I did. Because love turned every absurdity into gospel. A sudden click echoed from the hallway. My head snapped up. The rotary handset had rocked in its cradle, subtle, but unmistakable. Marco's ears flicked, yet he stayed on my lap, as though no physical motion was required anymore. The current flowed fine right where we sat. "Okay," I breathed, adrenaline surging. "Okay, Tom. I'm listening." I wiped my eyes, peeled the little letter from its shelter. The flop crackled like autumn leaves. For one tremoring heartbeat, I feared the ink might have faded to nothing, that after all this time Tom's voice would open its mouth and no sound would come. But Marco's purr deepened, a bass chord under the hush, and the air warmed, as if a distant sun stepped closer. I slid my finger beneath the flap, slow, reverent, and felt the seal give. Pieces weren't enough anymore. It was time for the whole picture. 3 nights passed in a low, restless hum. I kept Tom's opened letter tucked inside my robe pocket the way children keep lucky stones, fingering it whenever silence grew too heavy. The words were gentle, hopeful, infuriatingly certain that love could trespass death. I wanted to believe, yet disbelief clung like cold smoke. On the 4th night a March rain rattled the gutters. I dozed in the hallway armchair, blanket across my knees, Marco sprawled warm against my ribs. The rotary phone perched on its table less than an arm's length away. I'd left the lamp burning, dared it to blink. The clock on the wall ticked past 2:07 a.m. A gust sighed through the mail slot. Marco's ears twitched. Mine followed. Then, with no warning except the quickening of my own pulse, Aura rang. No jolt of terror this time. Only a surge of something sharper than courage, yearning. I snatched the receiver before the bell could finish its second cry. Tom. My voice trembled but held. For a heartbeat there was only the faint hiss of the storm outside, a hush so absolute I felt suspended between seconds. Then a rustle, as though someone shifted paper beside a microphone. Out of the static floated a breath, thin as a reed's whistle. "I'm here." A whisper no more than air against my eardrum, yet it slammed straight into my spine. Tears burst hot. "Is it you? Tom, is it really?" The line crackled, warbled. A muffled clatter like fingers brushing coiled cord, then silence swallowed everything. Not the click of a normal disconnect, just vacuum. "Tom," I shouted, half standing. "Stay with me, please." Nothing. The handset felt suddenly hollow, a seashell robbed of surf. Marco leapt from the chair to the floorboards, tail high, eyes locked on me with fierce insistence. "Listen." But the phone was dead. I forced the receiver back onto its cradle, palms slick. For a long minute I just stood there, breathing in knife-edged gulps, waiting for the world to restart. When my knees finally buckled, I slid down the wall until hips met hardwood, blanket puddling around my ankles. Marco padded over, climbed onto my lap, and unleashed a purr so deep I could feel it reverberate through the soles of my feet. The hallway lamp threw a soft pool of gold around us. Outside, rain kept drumming the roof in steady 4/4 time. I pressed a shaking hand to Marco's back, eyes clenched shut. I sat on the floor, listening to Marco's purr fill the whole house, and that sound beat like the heart of our past. Every rumble echoed Tom's laugh in the kitchen, Tom's footstep on the stairs, Tom's voice calling, "Honey, come look at this." It was absurd, impossible, perfect. My grief and wonder braided so tight I couldn't tell where one ended. Minutes, maybe hours, ticked by before exhaustion dragged me upright. I kissed Marco's forehead, set the receiver neatly in its nest, and shuffled back to bed, whispering promises to keep vigil tomorrow. Daylight arrived gray and meek. I padded to the hallway, throat desert dry, half expecting the night's miracle to dissolve in coffee steam. But the first thing I saw froze me mid-stride. The receiver dangled, cord twisting slowly like a pendulum. I was certain I'd placed it back. Had grief's fog fooled me? Or had something, lifted it after I left? My fingertips brushed the Bakelite, cool, unmoving, cryptic as a sealed tomb. A breath caught behind my ribs. "You hung up, didn't you? You kept talking and forgot the rest of us live by wires and plastic." Marco trotted in, sat beneath the swaying cord, and tilted his head as if listening to an echo I couldn't reach. I swallowed hard, righted the handset, and forced a steady inhale. "Okay, my love," I whispered to the quiet that smelled faintly of ozone and old cedar. Message received. There would be skeptics, friends who'd blame a crossed line, electricians who'd mutter about residual current. I might have believed them myself 3 days ago. But Tom's letter lay folded in my pocket, its postscript still scorching my skin. "Tell Marco I'm with you." Now I knew the truth nested deeper than circuitry. Love had its own infrastructure, cables spun of memory and devotion, maintained by a ginger cat who refused to let them corrode. I pressed a kiss to Marco's crown. He answered with a thunderlow purr that vibrated up my sternum and steadied the tremble in my hands. "Whenever you're ready, Tom," I breathed, voice both invitation and vow. "The line is open." Somewhere inside the phone, a ghost circuit seemed to hum in reply, quiet, patient, eternal. The rain tapered to a sullen drizzle by late afternoon, and I found myself drifting through closets like a ghost sifting her own relics. Grief does that, turns your hands into divining rods for anything that still hums with the person you lost. Behind Tom's worn field jacket, on the highest shelf of the hallway wardrobe, a leather-bound address book tumbled into my palm. I hadn't seen it in years. Its cover smelled of motor oil and aftershave. I carried it to the kitchen table, Marco trotting behind, tail flicking like a metronome. The pages were onion-thin, crowded with Tom's slanted block letters and tiny arrows pointing to revised numbers. Midway through the R section, a line leapt out. Ridgeview Cabin, our forever getaway, and beneath it, a phone number I'd never dialed in my life. My breath snagged. Ridgeview was the dilapidated lake house we'd bought on impulse in '99, convinced we'd spend every summer there till arthritis or grandchildren intervened. We sold it when medical bills began to pile higher than autumn leaves. I assumed the landline had been disconnected the day escrow closed. A tremor rode my spine. What if? I punched the digits into my cell before courage could back out. It rang twice, 3 times. On the 4th, a man's voice, friendly, wary, answered. "Hello. Hi, my name is Emma Richards. I'm sorry to bother you. Do you happen to live at Ridgeview Lane, number 24? A chair scraped on the other end. I pictured someone standing to catch unexpected balance. Yes, that's right. Is everything okay? I used to own that cabin with my husband." I found the old phone number and I trailed off, feeling foolish. "Could you tell me if the landline is still active?" He exhaled, half laugh, half confusion. "Funny you ask. We never use it, came with the place. But this week the darn thing's been dialing out on its own. Happened twice, both times in the middle of the night. We figured it was a wiring short." Blood roared in my ears. "Do you know what number it called?" A local operator gave me an area code 406 and a prefix I didn't recognize. I wrote it down. "Hang on. paper rustled. He read the digits. My knees nearly buckled. It was my house number, my useless rotary phone. I studied against the counter. Marco meowed, an urgent chirrup. Listen. Sir, I managed. Voice paper thin. That phone. There's no service on our end. It shouldn't be able to receive. He paused. Ma'am, all I know is my phone log shows 2 outgoing calls, each about 10 seconds. Nobody here touched the handset. 10 seconds. Long enough for a single whispered "I'm here." Ice and fire chased each other through my veins. Thank you, I breathed. You've helped more than you know. He sounded relieved and unsettled at once. We exchanged polite goodbyes, promises to stay in touch if the glitch returned. When the line clicked dead, I stood in the silent kitchen, cell phone trembling in my grip, the old address book open like a portal on the table. Marco leapt into a chair, green eyes fixed on me. My chest lurched with a truth too heavy for bone. The calls weren't coming from nowhere. They were coming from the place where Tom and I built our wildest dreams, the cabin we'd sworn would cradle every version of us, even the ones we'd never live to see. Somehow Tom had reached from that memory-soaked timber frame, through dusty wiring, across miles of sagging poles, into the obsolete handset where our cat kept vigil. I pressed my palms to the cool formica, fighting the spin of the room. You did it, I whispered to the phone lying silent in its cradle. You kept your promise. Faint thunder muttered over the hills. Marco padded across the table and settled on the address book, tail curling around the page like a bookmark. His purr rose rich, insistent, alive. The sound anchored me to the floor, same way Tom's hand on the small of my back once anchored me in crowds. I tore a scrap from a grocery receipt and copied the cabin number in fresh ink. Then I wrote beneath it, "Proof. Hold fast." I tucked the scrap inside Tom's letter, testimony folded into testimony. My mind reeled with the logistics, dead circuits, power surges, improbable cross-connects, yet my heart dismissed them all with a single pulse. Logic could catalog events, only love could orchestrate them. I had wanted something tangible, a sign etched beyond coincidence, and here it was, delivered by a stranger bewildered by his own phone log. I scooped Marco into my arms. He butted his head beneath my chin, purr drumming steady as a metronome. Thank you, keeper of the line, I whispered into his fur. He never let go of us, and you never let go of him. Outside, the sky cracked open with sunset fire, burning the drizzle to gold. I pressed my palm to the rotary's cool face. For once I didn't beg it to ring. Some cables, I realized, don't need electricity, only memory and a love stubborn enough to keep dialing until someone finally answers. Night settled without ceremony, a velvet hush broken only by the boiler's sighs and the slow tick of the hallway clock. For the first time in months, the phone table stood empty, no tawny silhouette, no emerald green eyes trained on the receiver. I waited until the minute hand slipped past Marco's usual hour, telling myself he'd appear any second, that I'd hear the soft whump of paws against wood. He didn't come. I walked the dark corridors, whispering his name, heart drumming a warning I tried to ignore. When my search ended back at the vacant table, unease prickled like static over skin. Maybe he's tired, I reasoned, forcing a shaky laugh. Cats reinvent routines all the time. But the hallway felt wrong, unbalanced, as if a lantern had been snuffed in a room far larger than this house. I left the lamp on, retreated to bed, and spent the hollow hours listening for claws on hardwood that never arrived. Dawn cracked pale pink over the pines. Sleep had come in scraps, each dream tugging me toward the phone only to dissolve before I reached it. I padded downstairs, got heavy, and froze at the living room window. Marco sat on the sill, spine straight, tail coiled neatly over his paws. Sunrise flared behind him, gilding his fur so he seemed carved from light itself. His gaze was fixed on the bruised horizon where night's last stars faded like distant sparks. He didn't turn when I whispered his name. He only blinked, slow and solemn, eyes reflecting a sky I couldn't see. A hush unfurled in the room, sacred and huge. My pulse slowed to match its tempo. I realized he was saying goodbye not to me, but to the tether he'd guarded so fiercely. Message delivered, his posture declared. Line secure. Mission complete. Tears blurred the scene. "It's all right," I murmured, unsure if I spoke to him or to the golden hush pooling behind my ribs. "You've done enough, brave boy." Marco rose with unhurried grace, stretched once, then leapt to the floor. Each step seemed measured by some inner metronome I couldn't hear. He padded down the hall, past the photo, past the bath door, past every landmark of his vigil, and reached the table where the rotary phone rested in early morning glow. He circled the base, settled, and curled his tail. His shoulders relaxed, chin lowering onto folded paws the way he always did at 9:30 each night. But this was sunrise, the hour he normally demanded breakfast. A tremor rippled through me. "Marco." I knelt beside him, heart banging out an unruly rhythm. His breathing was even, eyes half closed, whiskers quivering with exhale. I laid a hand on his flank, warm, soft, familiar. He didn't move. Minutes stretched. Light crept across the phone's faceplate, silvering the dust in its cracks. Marco's chest rose, fell, slowed. A final sigh fluttered past his lips, ruffled the fur beneath my palm, and then his body went still, so gently the hush barely noticed. My own breath ceased. Grief rushed in, fierce, immediate, but something else pulled beneath it, deeper than sorrow, older than language. Peace. I slid arms beneath his limp weight and lifted him to my chest. He was lighter than I remembered, as if some invisible ballast had slipped free. Pressing my cheek to his fur, I waited for the aftershiver of loss, the hollow collapse. Instead, I felt a pulse. Not the soft thrum of feline heart that had quieted. This beat slower, wider, like a drum carried across distance. And beneath it, a second rhythm, my own, answering in harmonized echo. 2 hearts. No, 3. Mine and Marco's memory, and a third cadence thrumming just beyond flesh and bone, Tom's. The realization flooded me with warmth so fierce it bordered on pain. Tears spilled, but they tasted less like grief than like gratitude too heavy to stay inside. I rocked there on the oak floor, sunlight climbing my shoulders, the phone between us humming its mute, faithful hush. "I hear you," I whispered into Marco's fur. "Both of you. All of us." The words steadied the quake in my lungs. Outside, a single gull cried over the river. The boiler kicked, radiators clinked, life nudged forward, but the room remained nestled inside that encompassing heartbeat, as if time itself paused to honor the messenger. At length I rose, cradling Marco, and laid him in the old woven basket where he'd slept as a kitten. I draped his favorite blanket, a ragged cub's tall Tom never let me throw out, over his shoulders. The sunrise painted stripes across his coat. He looked caught mid-dream, halfway through some celestial door. On the table the rotary phone sat silent, handset resting true. I touched it once, fingers gentle, and whispered a promise. "The line stays open. As long as I breathe, it stays open." Thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the ridge, soft as a baritone lullaby. I closed my eyes and felt that triple-threaded pulse echo again, steady, steadfast, eternal. Then I carried Marco to the garden where spring crocuses were daring the last frost, and laid him beneath the birch tree we'd planted the summer after Tom returned from war. The roots would welcome him. The soil already knew his name. When I went back inside, dawn had tilted fully into day. The phone waited, a silent sentinel, ready for the next impossible hello. I set a fresh flower in a jar beside it, smoothed the towel in Marco's basket, and stood listening to the quiet. In the hush, I could still feel it, the gentle, impossible heartbeat of us three, threading the walls, the wires, the air. And I knew, beyond any doubt, that it would echo here for as long as love could remember how to speak. I keep Marco's basket by the window that frames the river bend, his final berth under a quilt of Cubs blue and sunrise gold. Most mornings, before the kettle hums or the robins quarrel, I kneel there and let the quiet settle around us like an old shawl. Grief has thinned to something softer than pain, thicker than air, an atmosphere I breathe without thinking. Beside the basket sits the rotary phone, still plugged into a wall that offers no service, still crowned by the sepia photograph Tom loved best. He grins from under his faded cap. Marco, kitten small, tumbles over his shoulder. The picture bows a little now, as if leaning closer to hear. I never remove it. At dusk I slide it forward on the phone's body, press one of Marco's paw prints, inked onto cardstock the day the vet whispered condolences, against the base, and whisper the same invitation. Call if you want. I'll be here, waiting the way you waited for me. The handset's cradle is worn where feline whiskers brushed night after night. Sometimes I imagine I can still see the faintest indents where Marco's claws gripped plastic during the first impossible ring. I dust the phone every Sunday, tracing those grooves like Braille, rereading a language carved by devotion. These evenings I sit cross-legged on the rug, basket at my side, letter in my lap, and let memory reel like film through a crank projector. Pieces flicker, Tom in uniform, eyes sparkling mischief, his calloused hand coaxing Marco to chase flashlight stars on the ceiling, my young laughter echoing between fresh-painted walls. Each frame glows brighter than the last because time, it turns out, is backlit by love when you play it the right direction. I talk aloud, unembarrassed now. Remember the chili cook-off, Tom? When you bribed the judges with guitar lessons. The room seems to breathe, the radiator ticking a scent. I rest fingers on the letter Captain Collins delivered, edges softened by constant unfolding, and trace Tom's closing line. Tell Marco I'm with you. The ink has smudged slightly where my thumbs press each time. When dusk creeps in, I switch on the hallway lamp, the same one that once haloed an orange sentinel keeping vigil. Its glow spills across floorboards polished by pacing feet, by claws, by grief, by hope. I arrange the ritual, photo on the phone, paw print against the cradle, letters centered like a cornerstone. Then I douse the rest of the lights and let shadows gather. Silence follows, deeper than ordinary quiet. It is the hush of possibility, of breath held between worlds. The receiver stays still, but I watch anyway, eyes attuned to the slightest tremor. My chest rises and falls in unison with a rhythm I swear I still feel. Mine, Marco's memory, Tom's echo. 3 beats weaving a braid tighter than blood. Sometimes wind snaps the gutters and my pulse leaps. Sometimes the fridge hum mimics static, and I find myself halfway to the phone before sense reins me back. Yet I'm never disappointed when it doesn't ring. The miracle happened. Its afterglow is enough. Proof doesn't need repetition to stay true. On the anniversary of the first ring, I light a candle and set it behind the phone so glass throws ripples of gold across bakelite. Rain drums in slow triplets on the roof, the same song that accompanied Tom's whispered "I'm here." I speak, voice steady. You kept your promise, love. If you can hear me, know that I kept mine. The line is open. Always. No reply comes, but warmth pulls against my spine, as though someone leans close. I close my eyes, and for one breath the scent of cedar and citrus and ginger fur braids with wax and rain. In that mingled perfume, memories dance so vividly the room itself seems to shift, walls expanding to accommodate every version of us we ever were. I picture Marco trotting proud between worlds, delivering reports. Mission accomplished. Human listens now. I picture Tom laughing, ruffling fur, promising extra treats for exceptional service. The thought tilts a smile into my tears. Hour slides into hour, candle gutters, yet I remain seated, letter in one hand, handset cradled in the other. I murmur stories how the garden crocuses erupted purple this spring, how the rich cabin's new owner mailed me a Polaroid of the phone, still screwed to the wall. Just thought you'd like to see the contraption that called you. Life keeps expanding outward, but each new circle traces the geometry Tom and Marco drew first. Connection as lifeline, love as circuitry no engineer could blueprint. At last I rise, tucking the letter beneath the photo. I kiss two fingertips, press them to Tom's laughing face, then to Marco's inked paw. The candle I snuff with a breath, the hallway lamp I leave glowing. Stepping toward the stairs, I pause, fingers on the switch. The phone sits quiet, regal, patient. "Good night, boys," I whisper. "Same time tomorrow." Sometimes, in bright midday, the logical part of me whispers this whole thing was grief's hallucination, faulty wiring, random calls, a cat's quirky habit amplified by sorrow. A softer voice older than logic counters, and what if the letter dated decades ago arriving the very next morning? What if numbers dialed from an unpowered cabin? What if a cat who laid down only after the final message was delivered? I carry both narratives like stones in opposite pockets, but only one weighs warm. On rare afternoons, neighborhood children ask about the strange antique in my hall. I tell them it's a hotline for angels, and they laugh, and I let them. One day they'll learn some truths hide behind jokes because they're too bright for naked eyes. Until then, the phone remains exactly what it is, proof that channels endure if hearts refuse disconnection. Night after night, month swirling into month, I keep setting that photograph on its plastic throne, keep placing Marco's paw nearby, keep whispering the invitation that is equal parts prayer and promise. If you want to call a call, I'm waiting, the way you waited for me. Sometimes I wonder if I've imagined all this, if it's a fairy tale I spun from longing. But then, just as doubt sharpens its teeth, I hear a faint click inside the silent phone, like someone gently replacing the receiver, and I tell myself, no, it happened. I saw it with my own eyes. If you're chest tightened reading our story, type, "Animals remember those we loved," because they do, often far better than we ever could.
When I saw a shape wobbling through the morning fog, my chest locked up because I understood it hadn't come here by accident. I'd driven to the old Moose Creek cabin the night before, planning nothing more heroic than patching its leaking roof and hiding from people for a while. After 40 years as a backcountry ranger, retirement felt too loud. The cabin felt silent in the best possible way. Just me, a thermos of coffee, and the high hush of the Rockies. Dawn spread a thin pearl light across the clearing. I stepped onto the sagging porch boards to test the weather and nearly kicked over my toolbox. That's when the fog opened and there he was. At first I thought he was a grouse. Small, hunched, mottled brown. Then the sunlight nicked one feather and flashed the dark bronze only golden eagles wear. An eaglet no bigger than a house cat dragging a wing at a helpless angle. He should have bolted. A wounded bird's first law is flee or die. But he didn't budge. He tilted his head, bright eyes locked on mine, as if I were the thing he'd come looking for. I took a step, he took 1-2 toward me. Another step, again he matched me, pausing only to steady the useless wing with his beak. By the time we met in the middle of the clearing, my pulse was rattling like hail on a tin roof. I crouched, palms open. Easy, little fella. His talons clicked once on the grass, but the stare never wavered. No hiss, no flap, no retreat. I slipped my hands around his body, feeling the frantic hammer of his heart, and carried him across the porch threshold. Inside smelled of pine, dust, and stove smoke. I lined an old fruit crate with my jacket and eased him in. He settled, let out a breathy kick that sounded almost relieved. That startled me more than the wound. A wild eagle chick trusting a human? That doesn't happen. I trimmed a strip off my flannel sleeve and jury-rigged a sling to brace the broken wing. He watched every move, eyes bright, unblinking, as though memorizing me. No panic, no fight, just patient concentration the way a person watches a doctor thread stitches. He didn't beg, I kept telling myself while rummaging for water. He asked without a sound. And the water trembled in the cup because my hands finally started to shake. I found half a trout I'd smoked the week before. Broke it into strips. He accepted the first bite from my fingers, swallowed, then looked up as if to say that's good, but there's something else you need to see. I laughed at the thought, felt foolish, then laughed again because that gaze was so direct I could almost hear a voice behind it. By noon I'd forgotten the roof and every plan I'd carried in. All that mattered was the tiny rise and fall of feathers in the crate and the clock tick of talons on Cedar when he shifted position. Outside, the fog lifted into blue sky, but the cabin stayed dim, its windows smeared with years of dust. I leaned against the doorframe, bone-tired, oddly peaceful. 3 hours later, a branch cracked somewhere near the tree line. The eaglet lifted his head sharply, eyes fixed on the doorway. I edged to the window but saw nothing, only sunlight sliding across rust-red pine trunks. The forest was breathing, listening. Something else was out there. The eaglet knew. And his calmness, his utter certainty, sent an unexpected chill up my neck. Night lowered early in the valley. I fed him again, set a lantern on the floor, and stretched out in my sleeping bag a few feet away. Every time the wind stirred, he answered with that soft kiak, low and even. Not fear. A signal. Like he was calling coordinates in a language older than the cabin, older than me. Around midnight I woke to silence so complete it rang. The lantern had burned out. Moonlight painted the walls silver. The eaglet sat upright in the crate, staring at the door. I followed his gaze and for a heartbeat thought the shadows were moving. But nothing crossed the threshold, nothing breathed but us. Yet the boy inside me, the one who once believed the woods could speak, heard something pacing just beyond the line where lamplight would have ended. I almost opened the door right then. But the eaglet blinked, slow and certain, and I felt a wordless warning, not yet. Dawn bled pink over the ridge. I brewed coffee, he preened his feathers with meticulous care, and an idea settled on me heavier than the mountains themselves. Maybe I hadn't rescued him at all. Maybe I'd been summoned. The sun climbed bright and innocent and I caught myself smiling. Ridiculous, right? A man hauled out of retirement by a bird barely old enough to fly. I shook my head, tightening the last knot on his wing brace. You'll be back in the sky before you know it, partner. He cocked that same wise angle. And for the first time in years I felt like someone believed every promise I made. I stepped outside to fetch fresh water. The clearing sat quiet, almost expectant. The forest edge was darker than I remembered, as though keeping a secret in its pockets. I glanced over my shoulder at the open cabin door and that little figure in the crate. The distance between us suddenly felt fragile as glass. I thought that was the end of it, just a simple act of kindness for a hurt fledgling. I had no idea whom he would bring to my door. He never asked for help. He looked at me as if he already knew I would understand. The eaglet spent that first night tucked inside the fruit crate, wrapped in my flannel like a child in borrowed blankets. He drank in slow, greedy sips whenever I tipped the cup to his beak, then sagged against the boards, each breath rattling as if the whole mountain sat on his chest. I lay 2 yards away, boots still on, listening to the wet scrape of his lungs and wondering how many miles of sky he'd already lost. Around midnight the cabin settled, old logs giving that tired sigh houses make when they remember who built them, and something new stirred outside. A muffled thump. Then another, heavier, like a bowling ball, rolled across pine needles. I killed the lantern and held my own breath. The steps circled once, slow and deliberate, then drifted off toward the timberline. No grunt, no snarl, just weight moving through darkness with purpose. Morning cracked bright and cold. When I opened the door, the world smelled of river. There on the threshold lay a fresh-cut rainbow trout, thick as my forearm, still beaded with water. I hadn't fished. No neighbor lives within 20 miles. Hawks don't leave tribute and coyotes never share. I stared until the coffee in my mug went lukewarm, then carried the fish inside, split it, and fed the eaglet small flakes of pink flesh. He gulped them, feathers trembling, but his eyes kept skating to the doorway as if checking whether his courier had arrived for a tip. That afternoon he tried to stand. The sling held, yet his legs tremored like saplings in wind. When I laid him back down, he threw his head toward the open window and loosed a sharp, rising kiak, once, twice, 3 times, each note climbing a step higher, echoing between the ridges. Not distress. A summons. I felt it in my ribs the way a struck bell hums long after the mallet lifts. Dusk bled across the clearing. I hammered a loose shingle, but every swing of the hammer felt smaller than the sound clinging to those trees. Somewhere out there, something was listening. Returning the signal may be too soft for human ears. The second night, the footsteps came earlier. Same slow wait, but now they paused by the porch boards. I eased the rifle from its rack, heart thumping like it wanted out. The steps resumed, once around the walls, then vanished. The eaglet didn't startle. He lifted his head, cocked it, and let one soft chirp float into the dark, almost conversational. I sat awake till dawn, gun across my knees, wondering why I suddenly felt like the least knowledgeable creature in the valley. At first light, I found a second trout, bigger, bright silver, no tooth marks. I cleaned it on the chopping stump while ravens shot me suspicious glances as if I'd stolen their offering. The eaglet ate until his crop bulged, then leaned back and released a single high-pitched cry so pure it felt carved out of crystal. The forest answered with silence so deep it had to be full of meaning. On the third evening, storm clouds bruised the sky purple. I brought in extra firewood, settled the eaglet, and had just latched the door when the night itself seemed to step forward. A shape materialized at the edge of the porch, tall, lean, fur-black as burnt cedar, moonlight combed through with one narrow slash of white along the jaw. A wolf. He didn't growl. Didn't bare teeth. He simply stood, weight-balanced, yellow eyes glowing like tiny campfires. My pulse hammered, every ranger instinct screamed predator. I raised the rifle halfway, then noticed his gaze wasn't on me at all. It cut past my shoulder, straight to the crate where the eaglet waited. The bird answered with a low, steady chirr. The wolf's ears twitched, not back in threat but forward as though catching a familiar voice on the wind. I could have sworn recognition flickered there, something older than fear, older than the hunt. I cleared my throat, a sound far braver than I felt. Easy, boy. The barrel wavered. The wolf blinked, slow, deliberate. Then, with the grace of falling snow, he folded his legs and sat on the top step. And waited. Minutes dragged like hours. Rain started, soft needles on the cedar roof. I could smell his coat, wild sage and river mud. The eaglet shuffled in the crate, never looking away. My arm ached from holding the rifle. I lowered it, breath hitching. I figured a hungry killer had come. But he just sat and waited. The cabin filled with a hum I can't describe, some invisible thread stretched between predator and fledgling, vibrating with memory. The wolf looked not at me, at the eaglet. There was something human in that gaze. Thunder rolled over the ridge. The lantern guttered once, then steadied. Outside, the wolf stayed motionless, sentinel in the storm. Inside, the eaglet's eyes gleamed, not with fear, but with the calm assurance of someone who's finally been found. The wolf came back the very next night, slipping out of the timber like a shadow given its own heartbeat. Same place on the porch. Same polite silence. He sat, watched the eaglet until dawn. Pearl gray spilled behind the peaks, then melted into the trees when the first chickadees started bragging about daylight. I barely slept, waiting for teeth that never flashed. The second night he returned again, paws silent on wet pine needles. No growl, no hunger in his stance. He parked himself 3 steps from the door. Nothing else on earth could have pried him from that post. The eaglet answered with a quiet trill so soft I felt it more in my ribs than in my ears. On the third night, the wolf carried something in his jaws. Not a rabbit. Not a bone. A bundle of green, mountain sweetgrass, stems still damp with creek water. He padded up, laid the offering square on the threshold, and backed off to his usual watch spot. I knelt, dumbfounded. Sweetgrass is medicine up here. Eagles nibble it for stomach ache. Old trappers chew it to clear the lungs. Had he scavenged it? No, the roots were clean, the cut fresh, as if he'd chosen the stalks with care. I set 2 stalks in the eaglet's crate. The bird snapped them up, swallowing in neat gulps, then leaned into the corner as if the ache inside him had eased a notch. My jaw floated somewhere down near my boots. The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of the eaglet feeding. That was all, just that tiny, satisfied rustle, yet it brought a calm to his eyes, the way a father settles when a lullaby finally works. Night after night the pattern repeated. Sometimes he arrived with more sweetgrass, sometimes with tufts of yarrow or strips of moist moss the color of emeralds. Not once did he ask for anything in return. He kept to a respectful distance, head high, nose testing the air, shoulders loose but coiled, ready to spring at anything that might threaten the fragile life behind my door. I started leaving the cabin lamp dark, sitting in the gloom where he couldn't see my face clearly, just to watch him through the cracked boards. His body was a map of scars, old knife of a gash along the flank, healed bite mark on the ear. A survivor, no question. Yet the way he settled into guard duty, quiet, deliberate, wasn't predator, wasn't curiosity. It was purpose. One evening an owl swooped low over the porch, the wolf lunged, not to kill but to herd the bird off course, then trotted back to his post without a sound. Another time a porcupine waddled too near, he circled, chuffed once, drove it away, returned to stillness. Every move said, nothing touches the eaglet. I tried reasoning it out. Maybe he'd lost his own pack, imprinted on the eagle's cry. Maybe the scent of blood triggered something strange in his brain. Maybe my favorite theory at 2 in the morning, he was the grown pup I'd saved all those years ago, paying an impossible debt. Each idea felt too small, like pulling a blanket corner over a storm. And always that question looped back, who are you, old boy? Why stay? On the 7th night, I eased onto the stoop while he was there, coffee steaming in my hand. He tensed but didn't rise. Moonlight threw silver bars across his muzzle. I spoke low, like greeting an armed stranger at your gate. You didn't come for me, did you? He blinked, slow, deliberate. My words came out a whisper. You came for him. The wolf's tail thumped once, dusty pine needles puffing. Confirmation? Coincidence? My heart believed the first option long before my head permitted it. At dawn he disappeared again, but something in the clearing felt newly stitched, threads binding wolf, man, and eaglet into one improbable fabric. I cleaned the crate, checked the sling, offered more water. The eaglet's breathing had smoothed almost to normal, the light in his eyes looked brighter than the sunrise itself. Standing there, I felt the size of what was happening tower over me. A wild wolf feeding medicine to an injured eagle chick, keeping watch all night like a veteran sentry. I'd cataloged thousands of animal behaviors in my ranger logs, but this belonged in no book. I thought it was just a free quirk of nature. But the truth ran deeper like a river under ice. He didn't come for food. He came for him. I spent the next morning sawing rotten rafters, but every scrape of the blade kept dragging up the same memory, one I hadn't touched in 2 decades. 20 years back, before retirement and bad knees, I'd been called to a logging road just north of here. A pair of weekend hunters had cornered a wolf pup under a culvert, claimed it was disease-ridden vermin, and meant to finish the job with A.30-06. The pup couldn't have weighed 20 pounds, all legs and ears coal black except for a thin milk-white dash under the jaw like a careless smear of paint. I talked the men down, wrapped the pup in my coat, and drove through the night to release him on the far side of Winter Ridge, far enough, I'd hoped, that no rifle report would ever reach him again. I watched him limp into the trees, turned the truck around, and told myself a ranger's good deed ends the moment the taillights fade. I hadn't thought about that drive in years until this wolf started showing up at my porch. Could it possibly be him? My brain shook its head. Wolves in the wild live 8, maybe 10, sometimes 12 if the winters are merciful. 20 is fantasy. Besides, the pup had been jet black all over, a glossy chunk of midnight. This one wore a distinct ivory streak along his lower jaw, a badge he carried like rank. Different animal. Had to be. But my heart kept whispering traitorous questions. That first night on the porch I'd spotted a faint scar on the wolf's left flank, the same spot where the pup had taken a hunter's ricochet. And those eyes, liquid amber, unafraid, felt like déjà vu every time they fixed on me. Doubt climbed my spine and nested there, warm and persistent. That evening he arrived earlier than usual, stepping from the pines while the sun still tangled in the branches. No herbs carried tonight, no trout, just himself. He halted at the bottom step as always, but when I eased onto the stoop, he didn't retreat. I set the coffee mug aside, palms visible, voice low. You remember me, don't you? The words sounded ridiculous in open air. He took one deliberate pace forward, timber creaking under his weight, until only 2 yards separated us. His nostrils fluttered, tasting the space between man and beast. I swear the clearing tilted, the rest of the world slid off somewhere beyond the tree line. Close up, the white slash under his jaw glowed like moon on snow. My pulse jumped. The pup smear had been smaller, but right there, same angle. I reached without thinking, slow, stopping inches from his muzzle. He didn't flinch. Instead, he met my gaze the way old friends sometimes do when words have become unnecessary. And in that moment, every neatly labeled fact in my head, lifespan, coat color, common sense, crumbled under a single impossible certainty: it's him. Wind rattled the cedars. The eaglet, tucked in his crate just inside the door, chirred once, soft, trusting. The wolf's ear flicked toward the sound, then back to me. He hadn't come for scraps, hadn't come to scavenge. He'd come to stand guard for the bird and somehow for me. Can an animal remember a face after 20 winters? Science says no. But science has never knelt on a porch at dusk while a wild wolf reads your soul like Braille. I exhaled the breath I didn't realize I was holding. You grew tall, old boy. My voice cracked like a sapling in frost. From habit more than need, I motioned toward the water pan I'd left near the steps. He ignored it, attention fixed on my eyes as though searching for the ranger who once freed him from a culvert. He looked at me as if I were one of his own. I don't know how long we stayed locked in that quiet vow. The mountains faded to silhouettes, bats stitched the first stars across the sky. At length he turned, padded back down the steps, and melted into the shadows, the clearing swallowing him without a sound. I stood there long after he vanished, hands trembling like green twigs, while the night pressed close, thick with wonder and questions too large for language. If he hadn't come back the next night, I might have chalked the whole thing up to frontier loneliness and moonlit imagination. But the next night was waiting to prove me wrong. The fifth night started like the others, waxing moon, hush of pines, but the wolf crossed a line he'd never crossed before. Instead of planting himself on the bottom step, he padded all the way up and curled right across the threshold, big shoulders wedged against the jamb. One heavy sigh, paws crossed, chin on them like an old farm dog. He wasn't visiting anymore, he'd declared residency. I sat on the floorboards a few feet inside, the eaglet dozing in his crate between us. The cabin lantern burned low, throwing gold bands over fur and feathers alike. My pulse steadied for the first time in days. Whatever storm had tied us together, it felt for one fragile hour like the world had finally quit spinning. Around midnight a high, needling hell sliced the stillness. Then another, closer. Coyotes plural, restless, hungry. The wolf's head snapped up, mine did too. I set the lantern on a crate lid and reached for the old Winchester I kept propped by the doorframe. The barrel felt cold, alien, almost embarrassing when laid alongside the calm certainty in his eyes. The coyotes sang again, maybe 200 yards out, threading through the timber where moonlight never touched. Shadows moved between shadows. I pumped around into the chamber. The clack echoed louder than any howl. The eaglet stirred, clicking his beak, the sound tiny but brave. The wolf rose, muscles rolling under the dark pelt, and stepped off the porch, no snarl, no show of teeth. He stopped 10 paces out, planted himself square between the cabin and the tree line, tail low, ears forward. A lone sentry on the edge of empire. Another yip burst from the brush, closer this time, testing. The wolf answered with a single chest-deep bark so forceful I felt it in the soles of my feet. Silence. Then rustle, figures pacing just beyond sight, gauging odds. Coyotes aren't foolish, they're opportunists. A wounded eagle chick smells as good as steak to them. But the posture of that wolf, head high, body still, spoke a language every scavenger understands. Try it and bleed. Minutes stretched tight as wire. I kept the rifle trained where shadows thickened, breath measured, heart rioting. The coyotes flirted with the clearing's edge, whined low, shuffled dry needles, then, one by one, the sounds unraveled into distance. Their chorus retreated up valley, swallowed by the ridges. Only when the last echo died did the wolf turn. He glanced at me not long, just enough, and padded back to the porch. Instead of lying down, he stepped inside, 3 cautious pawfalls over the threshold, and sat beside the crate. The eaglet peered up, offered a soft, throaty chirr. The wolf chuffed once, like a father saying hush now, storms past. I lowered the rifle, lungs deflating, throat hot with something that wasn't fear anymore. He'd risked his hide for the bird. Or, my mind finally dared the thought, for me too. He risked himself for him. Or for me. Dawn bled pale rose through the window slats. The wolf was gone, left without a sound, leaving only the faint heat his body had pressed into the boards. I knelt to check the eaglet, expecting the usual sluggish lift of his chest. Instead I found him standing, wobbling on stubby talons, slinged wing twitching at the shoulder joint. He gave a startled hop, flapped once, and managed a crooked half-inch rise before wobbling back into the crate. The breath I loosed fogged the air like church incense. I rocked back on my heels, laughing and near tears at the same time. The bird's blood was moving, life pushing outward again. And part of me knew it wasn't just the stitches or the herbs. Something about the wolf's watch had carried weight medicine alone cannot measure. I stepped outside, exhaustion and triumph wrestling in my chest. The clearing looked ordinary, the kind of ordinary that disguises miracles. Not a single paw print lingered in the damp soil, only my own boots and a faint scuff where he'd braced to face the coyotes. As if he'd never been there at all. I figured that was the finale, the eagle safe, the coyotes gone, the guardian's duty honored. Thought they'd won, end of tale. But the wolf hadn't shown me the most important thing yet. Morning broke bright as hammered brass, and the eaglet decided today was the day he'd beat gravity. He crawled out of the crate, talons scraping for purchase, lifted the half-mended wing and pumped once, twice, feathers slapping air like wet canvas. For half a breath he hovered a finger's width above the floorboard. Then the broken pinion faltered and he tumbled sideways in a flurry of dust and small, furious chirps. I rushed forward, hands outstretched, but he shook me off, dignity wounded deeper than bone. He hobbled to the threshold, stared at the empty clearing as if daring the sky to come closer next time. My chest ached watching that fierce spark trapped inside a body not yet ready. The wolf had spent the night head on paws, amber eyes half closed, listening to every wing beat like a nurse counting heartbeats. At sunrise he rose, gave the eaglet a soft rumble that sounded oddly like encouragement, and trotted into the timber without a backward glance. First time he'd left before dawn. I told myself he was hunting breakfast. But the sun slid west, shadows stretched thin, and dusk settled with no sign of him. One night bled into the next, still no paw prints, no bright eyes at the porch. The clearing felt suddenly enormous, a stage missing its lead actor. The eaglet called 3, 4, 5 times into the dark, high, piercing whistles meant for ridgelines to carry. Only the canyon wind answered back. On the second day, just after noon, the forest exhaled a sound I'd never heard, a low thunder of wings, deep and certain, a heartbeat turned inside out. An adult golden eagle swept over the trees, body longer than my arm's pan, primaries spread wide as barn doors. The bird circled once, sunlight striking bronze sparks off each feather, then folded its sails and dropped into the clearing. I froze halfway to the water barrel, every sense lit up like fuses. The adult touched down 6 feet from the eaglet, talons knitting the earth, head tilted in regal inspection. The eaglet chirred 3 staccato notes I'd come to recognize as greeting. The adult answered with a single, resonant click of its beak, the sound of flint striking steel. They knew each other. Somehow, impossibly, they knew. Before my brain could catch up, a dark figure eased from the tree line, my wolf, padding slow, eyes on the 2 birds. He came no closer, only sat, chest heaving from what must have been a hard run across valleys I couldn't name. His gaze flicked to me just long enough to pin my heart in place, then returned to his charges. How did you find him? The words scraped out, half prayer, half accusation. How did you know? The wolf said nothing, he'd already delivered his answer in feathers and living proof. The adult stepped forward, nudged the eaglet's sling with that lethal beak, testing strength. The eaglet braced, lifted both wings, one steady, one trembling, while the larger bird spread its own in a slow, deliberate fan, a lesson without words. This is what tomorrow looks like. The eaglet mirrored the motion as best he could. My throat tightened until breathing felt optional. Minutes passed, maybe hours, time puddled between wing beats. Eventually the adult hopped to the porch rail and settled, sentinel and teacher all at once. The wolf curled at the bottom step, tail covering his paws, gaze softening into something that looked dangerously like pride. I swear the air itself thickened with meaning, as though the valley had been waiting its whole life for this exact alignment of claw and paw and humbled man. I inched backward into the cabin, afraid a single wrong sound might snap the spell. The eaglet didn't notice, every atom of him pointed toward the larger bird. Guidance flowed between them in a language older than weather. And over it all loomed that single impossible question looping in my skull. How could a wolf track down an eagle across mountain ranges? How had he known which cry in the sky belonged to this chick? By sunset the adult launched skyward, a bronze flare against indigo, circled twice, and vanished beyond the ridge. The wolf rose, gave the eaglet one last measuring look as if confirming the lesson had taken, then melted into the timber the same way night slips into a room when you blow the lamp out. I stood alone on the porch, knees weak, soul roaring. I had thought rescuing a crippled bird and befriending a lone wolf was the ceiling of wonder. I thought I had seen everything, but nature was only beginning to show me the truth. Dawn pried the night open with a single golden blade, and the eaglet answered. He hopped from the crate to the porch rail, first time he'd dared that height, balanced, shook his feathers into place, and looked straight at the wolf as if asking permission. The wolf gave nothing more than a calm blink, but something in the set of his ears said now. The eaglet crouched, pumped both wings. Cloth sling fluttered, feathers hissed. He rose a foot, wobbled, came down hard. I lurched forward, then forced myself still. Too much help and he'd never leave. He tried again. This time he cleared a yard, hung there, body trembling like a compass needle caught between north and destiny. Air bucked beneath him, he fought it, climbed another foot. 2 full meters of impossible. My lungs forgot the sequence for breathing. The wolf stayed planted at the bottom step, amber eyes reflective as creek water, recording every heartbeat of ascent. I felt his tension more than saw it, muscles poised, yet utterly silent, the way a priest watches a baptism. The eaglet flailed once, talons clawing at nothing, balance slipping. A cry ripped from his throat, sharp, panicked. Before gravity could claim him, a shadow thundered overhead. The adult eagle, bronze and immaculate, dropped from the blue like a blessing, wings spread to catch the fledgling on a cushion of wind. One powerful downdraft steadied the youngster, another lifted both birds together in a spiral of sunlight and whirling down feathers. They climbed above the treetops, circling, the larger bird adjusting angles so the smaller could feel each contour of the wind. Higher, over the ridge where morning burned the snowcaps pink. My eyes stung, partly from looking into the glare, mostly from the surge of something too wide for words. Beside me, the wolf never shifted. He tracked them across the sky until they were 2 sparks flickering against the raw blue, until even those sparks vanished beyond the tallest peak. Only then did his ears relax, sliding back in what looked unmistakably like contentment. I finally exhaled, the sound shaking loose from somewhere below my ribs. "You did it," I whispered, not sure if I meant the bird, the wolf, or some larger grace binding the two. He flicked an ear at my voice but kept his gaze pinned to the last place the eagles had glimmered. I followed the line of his sight. Empty sky, roaring with absence, and felt a swell of gratitude so fierce it bordered on pain. I saw how he looked at the heavens, and in that look there was happiness. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The wolf stood as though carved from the same basalt as the peaks. I waited beside him, afraid any motion might crack the china-thin hush holding the world together. Finally he turned, padded down the steps, and paused at the edge of the clearing. Muscles bunched as if he were deciding between directions written in a language only mountains read. I thought that was the curtain drop, guardian released, story wrapped. I thought, well, that's the end of it. But he came back. 2 sunsets later, I was splitting kindling when the forest doorway opened and the wolf trotted into the light. No herbs, no trout. He carried only himself and something new in his posture. A looseness, almost playful. He stopped 6 feet away, lowered his head in a small, deliberate nod. Not subservience. Acknowledgement. The kind travelers trade when their roads finally diverge. I set the hatchet down, step hesitant. "You checking on me, old friend?" My voice cracked. He blinked, slow, that familiar gesture of understanding. Then swung toward the timber, tail swishing once like a final brushstroke on a finished painting. This time he didn't look back. Branches parted around him, swallowed black fur, and the forest closed silent as a secret. I stood alone, wind tugging my sleeves, heart loud enough to scare birds from a mile away. Above the ridge, 2 distant specks traced lazy loops against the horizon. Bronze tethered to bronze, apprentice following master's invisible script. I raised a hand in reflex, as if they could see, as if waving might matter. Maybe it did. I gathered the broken sling from the porch rail and folded it into my pocket. The cabin felt enormous without feathers rustling in the corner, without soft paws settling at the threshold. But the emptiness wasn't loss. It was a room newly prepared for whatever mystery chose to visit next. Because now I knew, the wild keeps its own ledgers. Debts carry across seasons, across species, across decades. And sometimes, if you're very quiet, you get to watch one small line balanced in full, right in your own front yard. I turned toward the tool shed, mind already rehearsing repairs that suddenly seemed less urgent than before. The mountains breathed, the sky opened wide, and somewhere beyond the ridge an eaglet rode the wind he'd been born to claim, while a lone wolf, miles below, padded beneath the pines content to walk the world a shade lighter. The clearing stayed empty for 2 full dawns. No black silhouette against the tree line, no soft pant of breath outside the threshold. The hush felt heavier than any howl. I kept scanning the ridge anyway, telling myself he'd earned the right to disappear. Still, the cabin boards creaked with a loneliness I hadn't felt since the day I first locked its door 20 years ago. On the third morning, I stepped out early, coffee steaming white in the chill. A thin fog clung to the grass. My boot hit something metallic, small, solid, half buried in needles. I knelt, brushed aside dew-wet duff, and the world narrowed to a single glint of steel. A folding knife, staghorn handle worn smooth, brass bolsters dulled by time. Across the butt plate a faint engraving caught the light. JT, keep the faith. My initials. A gift from my father the year I took the Ranger oath. I'd lost it 2 decades earlier on the far side of Winter Ridge. The same night I'd carried a half-dead wolf pup wrapped in my coat. I remember searching frantically in the beam of a flashlight, cursing the darkness, finally giving up when dawn pinked the granite. That knife had lain somewhere in those woods all this time, or so I believed until it winked at me from my own doorstep. I turned it over, throat tightening. Sap still filmed the hinge, pine resin so fresh it hadn't hardened. Someone or something had unearthed it recently, and walked who knows how many ridges to place it here, precisely where my foot would find it. He remembered. The realization hit harder than any rifle recoil. Only one creature knew both the knife and this porch. The pup I'd freed, now grown into the guardian who watched in eaglet heel. My knees gave, dropping me to the step. Fog beaded on my lashes while the knife blurred in my palm. All those nights he'd sat silent, nose lifted, ears swiveling to the eaglet's rasping wings. He'd also been weighing a debt none of us had known remained unpaid. And when the bird was safe, when the sky had reclaimed its own, he trekked back to the place of our first meeting, found the shard of metal I'd mourned and carried it home across ravines and talus fields. Wolves cache food, not keepsakes. But this wasn't for him. It was currency in a ledger older than language. I wiped the blade on my sleeve, opened it, the action still buttersmooth, and then closed it with a snap that echoed like a heartbeat. Thank you, I whispered into the fog, unsure which direction carried my words to the right ears. A squirrel scolded overhead. A jay flashed blue between trees. Otherwise, silence. No pawprints in the damp soil, no tuft of black fur snagged on bark. The wilderness keeps its secrets clean. I slipped the knife into my pocket, weight warm against the thigh, and felt something settle in my chest, not closure exactly, but an exquisite fullness, like the moment a long-held note resolves into harmony. They remember. And they repay. I stood there until the sun shook the last shreds of mist off the spruce needles. Work waited, roof planks to nail, water barrels to patch, but the usual urgency was gone. Every tick of the clock felt like borrowed grace. That evening I built a small fire in the yard, laid a strip of smoked venison beside it. Not bait, an offering of gratitude given back. I sat until the flames guttered down to ember. No eyes flashed from the dark. The meat cooled. I left it anyway. Inside, the cabin loomed quiet but no longer lonely. The crate sat folded in the corner, feathers swept away, sling washed and hung like a retired medal. I placed the knife on the windowsill where moonlight could polish the brass, then climbed into my bunk and let sleep take me under like a gentle tide. I thought that was the final chapter, debt settled, circle closed. But just before dawn I woke, stepped onto the porch and looked up. High above the valley, 2 eagles rode a spiral of pink dawn light, one broad-winged and regal, one smaller, steadier with every stroke. And far below, at the shadowed edge of the meadow, a lone black figure stood, head tipped skyward, watching his proteges stitch the clouds. I raised a hand, heart rattling against bone. He turned, met my gaze across the silver grass, and in that instant the distance between man and wolf collapsed into silent understanding. Then he slipped back into the timber, leaving only the echo of his gratitude stamped across an endless sky. They remember. And they give thanks. When the calendar tipped past 4 silent weeks, I almost convinced myself the valley had closed the ledger for good. The roof was fixed, the woodpile high, and the knife sat on the sill like a keepsake from some wilder life. But every morning I still angled my coffee toward the empty sky, hoping for bronze wings against the slate-blue peaks and trying to ignore how much hope hurt. The 5th Sunday dawned cloudless, air so clean it felt new-minted. I stepped outside and the world held its breath, even the creek seemed to hush its chatter. Then a shadow rippled across the clearing, broad, steady, unmistakable. A full-grown golden eagle coasted down the valley and, with a single majestic sweep, settled on the peak of my cabin roof. Wood creaked under talons, sunlight struck his feathers, turning each filament to hammered copper. He didn't call, didn't shift. He just looked down the slope of shingles, through the curl of smoke from my chimney, straight into my eyes. I froze on the porch step, heartbeat ticking loud enough to measure time. I'd seen wildlife stare before, challenge, curiosity, fear, but never whatever poured out of that gaze. It was closer to recognition, as if we shared a memory etched deeper than instincts could explain. Minutes stretched thin as fishing line. I should have felt small under that raptor's royalty. Instead, an odd calm flooded my chest. I managed a whisper. "You made it, kid." The eagle's head tilted at the sound of my voice, and the sun caught the faint scar where a sling once rubbed his shoulder. Same bird. No question. I thought he might launch right then, but instead he ducked, spread his wings half open, the motion slow, ceremonial, before folding them tight again. A gesture so deliberate it felt like a bow. My throat closed. Gratitude, plain as daylight, beamed from a creature that owed me nothing. The wind rustled through the aspens, carrying the hush of a chapel. He held the lock of that gaze a moment longer, then beat his wings once, twice, lifted clear of the roof in a flurry of glittering bronze, and arrowed upward above the treetops where the valley's silence finally cracked into the wild exclamation of his cry. It echoed off granite in 3 bright notes, then faded into the ceiling of the sky. I watched until the last fleck vanished against the sun. Only then did I notice the weight of stillness gathering at the tree line. A shape stepped from the pines, black as midnight, white/bright beneath the jaw, the wolf. He stood on the edge of shadow, legs long and straight, head high. Not approaching, not retreating. Simply being there, as if to underline what had just happened. My heart kicked hard. We hadn't seen each other in a month, yet nothing about him looked uncertain. He glanced once toward the patch of sky where the eagle had disappeared, then back to me. No wag, no whine, no need for motion. Just that steady amber gaze that had shepherded a wounded bird to flight and a wounded man to understanding. A breeze lifted the fur along his shoulders. Gold-green light flickered through spruce branches and flamed across his eyes. Something inside me cracked wider than fear or awe. Some inner door to a room I didn't know existed until he opened it. Every mile of mountain in my ranger days, every note in every field journal, suddenly seemed like small talk next to the conversation happening in that wordless stare. He held it for 3 breaths. Then he turned, so smoothly the grass barely swayed, and melted back into the timber. No crunch of needles, no flash of tail. Just gone. As though the forest had always been missing that one piece and was now complete. I stayed rooted to the porch, evening sliding its long blue shadows past my boots, feeling the earth's slow spin in my bones. A hawk cried far off. Somewhere deeper in the woods a branch snapped, maybe under paw, maybe under hoof. I couldn't tell and didn't need to. The wild had spoken its final sentences. Interpretation was mine to carry from here. I closed my eyes, let the silence settle like dust on a shelf, and felt the truth ring through me. Quiet, unstoppable, perfectly clear. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd never have believed it. But now I know in the wild there is more than strength. There is memory. There is gratitude. There is soul. If your heart is trembling with reverence right now, if you believe animals remember kindness, type, nature is wiser than us.